All right, so you're tackling your AQA GCSE on Germany. You have come to the right place. We're going to cut right through all the noise and break down the whole 1890 to 1945 period, everything from Kaiser Wilhelm right up to the fall of the Nazis. The goal here is super simple, to make your revision as clear and effective as possible. So let's just dive right in. So this is the big one, right? How on earth is this huge topic structured for your exam? I mean, you're looking at 55 years of some of the most dramatic history imaginable. Where do you even start? It can feel totally overwhelming, I get it. But the good news is there's actually a really clear logic to how it all fits together. And here's the absolute key. We're not just guessing here. Nope. We've built this whole thing by breaking down the official AQA syllabus, so you can think of this as your revision blueprint. It makes sure you're focusing on exactly what the examiners are looking for. Okay, so here's the plan. We'll start with a quick overview, the big picture. Then we'll dive into part 1, the growth of democracy. After that, part 2, the Depression's massive impact. Then part 3, which is all about life under the Nazis. And to finish off, we'll pull it all together with the key takeaways for your exam. So let's start with the big overview, democracy and dictatorship. And honestly, at its heart, this whole period is like a battle for Germany's soul. You've got this 55-year tug of war going on between two incredibly powerful, totally opposite forces, democracy and dictatorship. And we're going to see the whole nation swing, sometimes violently, from one extreme to the other. The AQA syllabus basically frames this whole thing like a two-act play. Act 1 is all about the democratic experiment, the rise and, spoiler alert, the collapse of the Weimar Republic, Germany's first real shot at democracy. And Act 2? Well, that's the age of dictatorship, the rise and fall of Nazism, which grew directly out of that failure. Getting your head around this massive contrast is, well, it's everything. It's the key to the whole topic. Right, let's jump into part 1, Germany and the growth of democracy. This is the story of how Germany went from the old rule of the Kaiser all the way through to the so-called Golden Age of Weimar. It's a heck of a ride, covering the collapsible Germany, the absolute trauma of World War I, and the chaotic, messy birth of a brand new democratic republic. So, what are we covering here? First up, we've got Kaiser Wilhelm's Germany. Then, the massive impact of World War I. Then we dive into the political unrest of 1919 and 1923. It was a wild time. After that, things calmed down a bit with the Stresemann era from 24 to 29. And finally, we'll look at the incredible Weimar culture that came out of it. It's a journey from a rigid, authoritarian state through a shattering defeat that sparks a revolution and into the chaos of the new republic's first few years. But then, we get this brief, glittering period of stability and cultural explosion, the Golden Age led by Gustav Stresemann. And let me tell you, those early Weimar years were just defined by constant crisis. And when I say crisis, I really, really mean it. This brand new democratic government was being attacked from all sides, right from day one. It was literally fighting for its life against enemies on the far left, enemies on the far right, and a totally catastrophic economic collapse. It was a perfect storm. Just look at this timeline. It perfectly shows the chaos. In 1919, you get the Spartacist uprising. A year later, in 1920, the Cap Putsch. Then, 1923, what a year. The French and Belgians occupy the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland. The hyperinflation crisis completely melts down the economy. And to top it all off, Hitler tries to take over the country with his Munich Putsch. I mean, can you imagine? All of that in just a few short years? It was absolutely relentless. So what exactly is hyperinflation? It's a term you absolutely have to know. This wasn't just your shopping getting a bit more expensive. Oh no. This was an economic crisis where the government printed so much money that it became, well, virtually worthless. Imagine your family's entire life savings, your pension, everything you'd ever worked for, just wiped out, gone, overnight. People were literally using wheelbarrows to carry their wages home. This created a level of economic trauma and bitterness that the extremists, like the Nazis, would later exploit masterfully. Okay, moving on to part 2, Germany and the Depression. This is where everything changes. Just when it looked like Germany was finally getting back on its feet, disaster strikes, and it comes from all the way across the Atlantic. The 1929 Wall Street crash kicks off the Great Depression, and the economic shockwave that hits Germany, well, it proves fatal for its democracy. So this whole section is about a tragic chain reaction. First, you've got the impact of the Great Depression. Then, that leads to a huge growth in support for extremist parties. That, in turn, causes the failure of the Weimar democracy itself, which leads us to Hitler's appointment as chancellor and finally the establishment of a full-blown dictatorship. It's like watching a line of dominoes fall. The Depression hits, millions lose their jobs, and suddenly people just lose all faith in the normal, moderate political parties. So where do they turn? To the extremes. The communists on one side and the Nazis on the other. The government is paralyzed, and in all that chaos, the old conservative elite make a fatal miscalculation. They hand Hitler the chancellorship. And this chart, wow, this just illustrates the story perfectly. Just look at these numbers. In 1928, before the Depression really bites, the Nazis are a tiny, almost irrelevant party. They've got just 12 seats in the Reichstag. 12. Then look at 1930. Just 2 years into the crisis, they've jumped to 107 seats. By July 1932, they're at 230 seats, making them the biggest party in Germany. I mean, you couldn't ask for clearer evidence of how economic despair just poured fuel on the fire of political extremism.
And here's the crucial bit. Once Hitler is in the door, he doesn't hang around. He moves with absolute lightning speed to tear down democracy. Step 1, he's appointed chancellor. Step 2, the Reichstag fire happens, which he uses as the perfect excuse to crush his political opponents. Step 3, he passes the Enabling Act, which basically lets him make laws without the parliament. Game over for democracy. Step 4, the Night of the Long Knives, where he gets rid of any rivals inside his own party. And by Step 5, he's combined the roles of chancellor and president to become the Führer. In about 18 months, democracy is completely dead, and Hitler is the undisputed dictator of Germany.
Right, so democracy is gone. And in part 3, we're going to explore the chilling reality of what came next. We're looking at the experiences of Germans under the Nazis, life in a totalitarian state. What was it actually like to live in Nazi Germany? We're going to see how the regime tried to control every single part of a person's life, from what job they did to who they married to what their kids were taught in school. Okay, so there's a lot to cover in this part. We'll be looking at the economic changes and rearmament, social policies, so that's women, youth, and religion. Then there's the racial policy and persecution. We'll look at their use of propaganda and censorship, the police state with the SS and the Gestapo, and finally we'll look at the opposition and resistance to the Nazis. It's about how they tried to shape society and, critically, the tools they used to hold on to power. The terror of the police state, the persuasion of propaganda, the horrific racial policies, and yeah, the few brave people who dared to resist. This table gives a really neat summary of the Nazi approach, which was basically to have a specific, controlling plan for every single group in society. So, you look at women. The policy aim was to return them to traditional roles. How'd they do it? With marriage loans, medals for having kids, and restricting the jobs they could do. For the youth, the aim was simple: create loyal future Nazis. The methods, the Hitler Youth and the League of German Maidens. And for the churches, the goal was to control and coordinate them. They tried this with the Reich Church, signing a Concordat with the Pope, and just straight-up persecution of anyone who resisted. And this really highlights the massive, stark imbalance of power. On one side, you have the methods of control, the whole state apparatus. We're talking propaganda, censorship, the SS, the Gestapo, the entire police state. It was overwhelming. And on the other side, the forms of opposition. You had small, brave groups like the White Rose Group, the Swing Youth, and the Edelweiss Pirates, and even a high-level attempt to kill Hitler with the July bomb plot in 1944. But they were just pockets of resistance, fighting against an all-powerful machine. Now we have to talk about Nazi racial policy, and central to that is this phrase, the final solution. This is the term the Nazis themselves used for their systematic plan for the genocide of the Jewish people. It was the horrific, logical endpoint of the anti-Semitic ideology that was at the absolute core of everything Nazism stood for. Okay, let's bring this all home now. We're moving to the key takeaways for your exam. The big question is, how do you tie all of this together for your revision? How do you connect these 3 distinct parts of the story into one coherent narrative? Here's what the AQA examiners really want you to do. Think thematically. So don't just learn a list of dates. Think about the political story, that journey from democracy to dictatorship. Think about the economic story, from hyperinflation through the Depression to rearmament, and the social story, the incredible freedom of Weimar versus the total control of the Nazis. You also need to consider the role of big ideas, like militarism, socialism, and of course, Nazism. And finally, the role of key individuals, people like Stresemann, Hindenburg, and Hitler, whose decisions literally changed the course of history. Linking the events to these big themes, that is the absolute key to getting a top-grade answer. So we'll leave you with the one question that really sits at the very heart of this entire topic. Democracy to dictatorship. How did it happen so fast? How did one of the most culturally and scientifically advanced nations in Europe collapse from a fragile democracy into a brutal totalitarian dictatorship in such a short space of time? That is the puzzle you need to keep turning over in your mind as you revise. Thanks for joining us.